You were born with individual strengths and a unique purpose. Don't let fears, false beliefs, or life's happenings diminish your influence. It's time to live and lead for impact. Host Kirsten Ross, expert of transformation, will help you defeat the drama and overcome the trauma that can stop you in your tracks. You'll gain focus, find confidence, and take bold action. Unleash passionate, purposeful you. Let's go.
Welcome to Live and Lead for Impact. I'm Kirsten Rush, your host, and this is episode number 155. Thank you for joining us today. I have a great guest. Her name is Susie Reynolds Reece. She's the founder and executive director of Suicide Prevention Allies, a nonprofit that formed from community grassroots efforts geared at preventing suicide. Reece is no stranger to the desperate need for suicide prevention, having dealt with major depression stemming from multiple traumas suffered during her early childhood. Reece shares her story of childhood trauma and losses to inspire others to speak openly about our most difficult human issues. Reece is a proud Southern Fried Asian, A.K.A. Korean Arkansan style, published author, national speaker, and mental health advocate, as well as a seasoned suicide prevention strategist and consultant. Thank you so much, Susie, for being on today. I'm really looking forward to hearing your story and about the important work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to speak with you.
Yeah, so let's just dive right in and start with, what are some of the life experiences that have motivated you to your important impact?
Pretty much all of them, but my earliest life experience, I was actually 10 years old, and my father and I lived at Fort Myers, Virginia, in Washington, D.C. He was first sergeant in the Old Guard, which is the 3rd Infantry of the Army. And one of the things that they do is they're actually the ceremonial unit and escort to the president. So when my father was younger, he had this dream of being in the Secret Service, but it's very difficult to be a member of the Secret Service. And this unit is essentially tasked with, if there's any kind of lockdown in Washington, D.C., they go in and they will set up and take care of the community. They also are the secondary to the Secret Service if there's an incident within the capital city. So it was pretty much as close as he could get to Secret Service within the military as possible, which is still very, very cool, very elite group of individuals.
Yeah. Wow.
So my dad was actually in President Clinton's inaugural parade, and I remember being on the sidelines in the inaugural parade, watching my dad orchestrate, the event and yelling at people, telling them what to do. And then he was in the parade, and I was like, obviously all these people are here for my dad because he's in charge. So.
Of course you would think that.
So, I just remember, he was this idol to me, and he was just someone that a lot of people around him really looked up to and admired for so many different reasons. So about a year after President Clinton had been elected into office, my father started going through retirement from the military, and he'd been in the military since he was 18. And through that experience, he also started going through a divorce because he was having some issues with his third wife. Mm-hmm. So during that time, I remember him explaining that we were going to move, and there was a lot of uncertainty because we weren't sure exactly where we were going to live and what his life would look like moving forward. And of course, that's just scary in itself, not to mention letting go of something that you've been a part of for more than 20 years of your life, on top of going through a divorce. So I remember him trying to explain all of this to me as best he could, and I was 10 at the time, and I didn't understand all of the stress that was going on, but I knew that things were different, things were changing, he was under stress, and I remember telling him that not only was I glad that he was leaving my stepmother, but that she had been physically abusing me the whole time they'd been together. She had done some pretty horrendous things that I will probably never forget. And just, there were so many incidents where my back was just completely destroyed, where I had scarring and she'd ripped hair out of my head. I mean, it was just horrible things. But because of him being out in the field and doing other things in the military, he'd be gone for weeks at a time. And so by the time he'd get back, I'd either have healed, or she would send me to stay with his parents. And so he never really witnessed all of the things that were happening to me. Not to mention, I was terrified of the woman, so I didn't want to tell him, because I was so scared that she was going to end up killing me. So I told him all of this, and I just remember his face it just lost all color. It's like the pink in his skin just completely went white, and I was scared, not for myself, but I just didn't understand what happened, and he didn't look like the man that I'd known my entire life. So a few days later, my dad ended up finding my stepmother, and he took her life, and then he took his own.
Oh my gosh.
So not only did I experience losing my dad and my stepmother, but I was also essentially orphaned because I didn't have any guardians at the time. So the military came in and took guardianship of me, and they are the ones who actually let me know what happened. And then they had to escort me to my closest living relatives, which happened to be my dad's parents, and they lived in Arkansas. So we go from being in Virginia to, being with my dad, my stepmother, and having his friends and family, or mainly his friends around who became family, to going to Arkansas and knowing relatives, but not necessarily having that same type of community that I had. Not to mention all of the difficulties that come with a situation like that, because when the incident of what happened was communicated to me, it was very much a point blank. This is what happened. This is where it happened. Your dad is dead, and that's it. And I'm 10 and don't know these people.
Oh my gosh.
So not only did you go through those experiences, but it was traumatic just getting the information. It was traumatizing because, for one, I was like, why are these strange people lying to me? And it was so uncomfortable for them because of the nature of what happened, and then having to relay that information over, that I realized very early on that suicide and these types of violent acts, we just avoid them. We avoid discussing them. We avoid trying to handle them or find solutions because they're so difficult. And so that was really my first, not only experience with suicide, but also that stigma that is associated with it and how uncomfortable it makes people. My father went from being this hero and someone that so many people admired and looked up to a whispered conversation until, after the funeral. And then it was, we're not going to discuss it. So as a child, you go from having someone that, is your everything, your role model, to where do I fit in society, because I don't have any parents and I don't know where I belong, or where I came from.
I can't even imagine. How did it feel too, knowing that you had shared that with him? I mean, I'm sure as an adult you realize that you're not responsible, but as a 10-year-old child, how did you process all of that?
Obviously something I felt very guilty for. And I think it took me probably 20 years to get to a point where I realized, and it wasn't just the fact that I gave him that information, but also this sense of, I could have done something, I should have done something, I should have told someone, or I knew something was wrong. But as a 10-year-old, you're right, what could I really have done?
Right.
And honestly, did I really understand the complexity of what was going on around me?
Yeah, heck no.
Right.
It's not like you had resources at your fingertips.
Exactly.
And
I probably knew something was wrong, but not to the extent of this is a possibility. And I had no idea what suicide was until, I was exposed to it. So it was definitely something that I blamed myself for a long time. I felt like I obviously contributed to this, and this is a lot of this is my fault. And then not only is it I feeling guilty for him dying, but also did I cause someone else's death? So it was a very difficult, emotional, recipe to try and wrap your head around as you're growing up. And of course, you hear other people's opinions and perspectives on things, and they don't even have the full picture to begin with. So you get all of these things going on, and it was a lot to try and overcome, to say the least. But as I got older and the more I started to understand the complexity of these types of situations, the complexity of suicide, I realized that, I can sit down and look at absolutely everything that there is as far as information and details around what happened. I can say, okay, he was going through retirement. That in itself is difficult. We know a lot of veterans die from suicide because they feel like they've lost this sense of purpose. Now he's also going through relationship issues and a divorce, and a very ugly divorce at that. So there's another risk factor. And then, he finds out his daughter's being abused. It wasn't one thing. It was many. And no matter how many things I realized were happening in that situation, I will never be able to say, this is why, or this is why, or all of these are why. Because when someone's gone, they are the only people that can tell us this is what's going on, and this is why.
Yeah, the source of the answers to all of that is
they're gone.
Not available. Right? Yeah.
So, a few years ago, I ended up going back because even though I've dealt with this for a long time, we have a tendency not to deal with things, especially traumatizing things like this. So I found my way back to the detective who worked my father's case, and I went back and I actually sat down and met with him and looked through the entire case file. And this man brought this binder, and it was like a 3-inch binder, and it was just huge and just full of information. And I looked through everything, and there were things that I didn't know about before. Obviously, there was a lot of information. And even after all of that, I still thought, I have no idea. I mean, I know all of these things, but I can't say one particular thing or one particular situation or one particular event was that reason, that triggering event for why this happened. So I think that's really difficult for a lot of suicide survivors to come to that as an answer, because it isn't really an answer. But that's the best answer we're going to get. And some of the survivors can't accept that and won't accept that. And it will drive you to this journey that you're just never going to find the end of. And I find that the most successful suicide survivors are those who realize, I will probably never know why. And that has to be the answer that I'm left with and that I accept. So.
Wow. Well, I had no idea that was the journey that we were going to take for the story of your past. And I am so sorry. And again, I can't imagine. So in looking through that binder, I am curious I mean, I know you didn't find closure, and I know you didn't find answers. Were you happy? Not happy. That's the very wrong word. Did you second guess doing that, or would you say, yes, that was the right decision, even though it didn't ultimately give me what I wanted?
I think it was definitely the right decision for me, because I remember being so young that I would hear what happened, and I would hear pieces of the actual incident and pieces of those things that led up to the incident. And so in my head, I had concocted this whole scenario and this whole, I knew what happened, but I never really did. And it was always someone's said this, or someone's opinion, or someone's perspective. And we all know that those things can definitely be inaccurate. So for me, it was important for me just to see it. And when I went into that room, I had this mentality. First of all, he was my dad. I will always love him as my father, and there's absolutely nothing that can change that. Second of all, I don't expect to get any answers out of this. I simply want to see what happened and see for myself, because I don't want to continue to believe what I've been told without having those facts alongside of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was really good for me. I have to admit, it was extremely overwhelming. So I'm sitting in this room, and the detective was absolutely just an amazing human being. He was so compassionate and patient, and I couldn't have asked for a better person to sit in that room and try and speak with, because there was no rush. He was like, I'm here all day if you need.
Oh, that's nice.
He was just an amazing human being. And not only that, but to sit in that room knowing how people perceive my father, who didn't really know him, that in itself is intimidating. But he didn't bring any kind of preconceived notions to the room. He simply sat there and talked to me like my dad was a human being that deserved that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was also really eye-opening to me too. And I think that not everyone can do that, because I remember them saying, like, he was like, do you have any questions? And I was like, I don't know, like,
right.
I'm so overwhelmed right now, and I'm just trying to like wrap my head around everything and be okay in this moment that I have no idea what I want to know. I didn't. I had no expectations going in.
Well, I can't imagine like just processing what was in the book, and then there's an amount of analysis that would need to happen to look for gaps, and then turn that into somehow words, and I just what are the questions I need to ask to fill in these gaps?
Exactly.
I mean,
and he said, he's like, I know this is overwhelming. He's like, if you have questions later on, and I really didn't. And what's really interesting, some might say, is I've developed somewhat of a relationship with this person, to where if I'm in the area, if I'm ever in Washington, D.C., I can call him and say, hey, let's go grab lunch and let's talk. And it's so interesting. And his partner, who worked my dad's case, her father actually died by suicide when she was younger as well. Mm-hmm. And it was such just, we've developed this relationship from it. And it was such a horrible, just entire situation. There was loss there, not just my dad, but my stepmother as well. And no matter, what she did to me, she was still a human being.
Right.
And yet we all came together and we put those horrible things aside, and we've built something, hopeful, and positive out of it. And it's just, I feel blessed to have had that opportunity to do that and to know them in some way because of this journey. Like, most people probably wouldn't think, let me go hang out with this detective,
Right.
So.
Right. Well, so I am so grateful to you. I don't know how many times I end up saying, but turning your tragedy into triumph. And so let's talk a little bit about how you have turned those horrendous experiences and what you learned about yourself and all of that into serving others. Tell me about the nonprofit. Did you start it? Did it already exist? Where do you serve? What do you do? All those kinds of things. I have all kinds of gaps. Yeah, I've got questions.
So yes, I did start it, and it was what happened was we had an interest in doing suicide prevention in our area, and people had identified that was an issue that we were dealing with, but no one really knew what to do. And so this group of people kind of had a meeting set up, and I show up, and I live in a retirement area. So there's a huge community that's all, people come here after they've decided I don't want to work anymore. And so a lot of them volunteer. But as you can imagine.
Oh, that's a nice place to
exactly.
have a nonprofit.
Beautiful. And it's beautiful. But as you can imagine, some of them are a bit older than I am. I'm mid-30s now. So I go to this meeting, and it's a group of people, and they all know each other, and they're all a bit older than me. And here I am, this new person, and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to sit here and not say anything. I don't know what I've gotten into. And it ended up becoming a grassroots group, and we originally called ourselves the Garland County Suicide Prevention Coalition, the longest name ever. Terrible. I don't recommend doing that. And we worked for a couple years, and after about 2.5 years, we were able to reduce our suicide rate by nearly 50%.
Wow.
So it was amazing. And I cannot take credit at all for that. I mean, it was definitely a community effort. So our community, after we got those numbers in, we had a community event, kind of like a town hall event, and we invited all the community leaders and anyone that wanted to come, and we wanted to take a vote and see if they would want for us to formalize into a nonprofit. So in 2017, in January, it was a unanimous vote. There were, I would say, around 75 or so people that came to the meeting and voted. Mm-hmm. And then in March, we formalized and got our paperwork and everything. So we decided to rebrand because that is the worst thing ever. And it's now called Suicide Prevention Allies. We are actually, Hot Springs, Arkansas is called Spa City.
Okay.
The first national park in the country, and we have hot springs where people would come and do thermal baths. And so
that sounds amazing.
It is amazing. It's absolutely gorgeous. And so I thought, let's do spa, and kind of it's a throwback to where we come from. And no matter how large we get, we'll always know where our roots are. So we actually are beyond the state of Arkansas at this point. We do a lot, primarily in Arkansas, because that's where most of our physical volunteers are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We have a satellite in Florida and one in Colorado as well. And so we're working on growing, but we're still a very young nonprofit, meaning that if you would like to donate anything,
yeah,
it's a shameless plug. But so as far as the things that we do, awareness is really always the foundation of what you want to build everything out on top of. And so things like this, doing podcasts, kind of making sure that people understand that suicide is a problem, explaining what that problem is, and then how can we actually address that problem. So I do a lot of media. I've been in magazines, and I'm like, I don't know what my job is, and this is like a strange life. But outside of that, then we do a lot of education. So not just what the problem of suicide is, but how to talk about that in a safe way, educating different populations. So I work with everyone. People will say, do you work with military? And I'm like, yes. Veterans, yes. We work in schools. We work with youth. We work with elderly populations. We work with minority populations. We work with, everything and everything.
So when you say educate, are you educating people to notice the signs, how to talk about it, how to ask, like what kinds of education?
Yeah, those are really basic. So your standards are always going to be warning signs and risk factors, and then protective factors. So yes, what are the signs? And people already know to some extent what those are. When you talk about warning signs, most people can really just kind of list those off pretty quickly. But that conversation of, okay, you're concerned with someone, how do you talk to them? That is a very big issue, because people are so scared of saying the wrong thing, or upsetting someone, or making it worse. And so just kind of giving them reassurance in that conversation and guiding them on the best ways to have that conversation, and meaning mainly when you ask someone if they're having thoughts of suicide, to actually say the word suicide and not, are you thinking of harming yourself? Because that can be vague, and people can come up with ways to kind of get around that if they want. Beyond educating on that, like I'm actually working on a presentation right now for people to do safe storytelling and safe presenting around suicide. So we see a lot of people that want to get involved and volunteer, and they have the best intentions, and then they get in the middle of it, and maybe it's been less than a year since they've lost someone, and they didn't realize how re-traumatizing that can be to try and express that information to a group of people. And it's not healthy for them. It's not healthy for the audience if they get up there and they start crying and, like reliving these things. So safety for your presenter, safety for your audience. It's not recommended to do general suicide prevention assemblies or events for under grades 8. So if you're 7th grade or below, we want to focus on positive psychology. We want to focus on who are trusted adults, who are safe adults that you can talk to if you're worried about someone. What are resources, things like that. But we don't want to come in and tell you a traumatizing story or something because it's not helpful and it's really not necessary. So just things like that. And other things too. I mean, obviously, if you're talking to youth, bullying comes up, cyberbullying comes up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Your resources, how do you help someone find those things? How do you help someone just, discuss this with someone? Because if you say you're being bullied, I mean, at this point, what does that even mean? So,
Right.
And there's so much to it. It's when people hear suicide prevention, I don't even know what that means anymore, or what that meaning is to others, because to me it's so complicated and there's so many complexities, and it really depends on who you're talking to and what their needs.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay, great. Well, tell me, what has been the biggest internal or external challenge for you in creating your impact?
So, I honestly, just doing suicide prevention, saying the word suicide is just an external problem, because it's such an off-putting word to people and they're so uncomfortable with it. So getting to where people are more comfortable saying that word. And I always tell people, I'm not trying to make you comfortable with suicide. I'm not trying to make it okay at all, because we're literally talking about life and death. That's not the goal, to be like, oh, I'm fine with this. And if you get to that point in life where, especially me, if I'm okay with having this conversation with someone, I probably shouldn't be doing this, because it's such a important conversation. You need to be serious when you do it. But kind of opening up that this is an okay conversation to have, and that if you're in need of help, it's okay to ask for help. Or if you're worried about someone, it's okay to ask them if they're okay or if they need help. And then I think internally, as far as challenges go, this is an exhausting, emotionally exhausting, physically exhausting. It's just an exhausting role to find yourself in. So there for a while, in my bio, you introduced me as Southern Fried Asian. I had to rebrand myself because people were calling me the suicide lady.
Oh, goodness.
And I was like, this is terrible. I do not want to be called that. No one will ever want to talk to me.
Right.
This is such a terrible name. It's great. And the fact that they felt comfortable to, they know what I do and there was comfort in that. But I can't be that. So I think for me, just recognizing self-care is so important. And in the state of Arkansas, there's really only a handful of people that do suicide prevention for a living. So we all have to really build a community, and we're so good about checking in on each other, and just taking the time to recognize okay, they've been a little quiet lately. Let me see if they're okay, and just making sure that we're doing the things that we're preaching.
Yeah. So as we talk about self-care, let's move into how do you stay motivated and moving during those tough times. I'm going to assume that we're going to probably some of those strategies are some self-care.
Right. So for me, I think balance is important, and I'm not a fan of work-life balance. I think harmony is better, because I just feel like nothing is ever going to be even across the board.
Yes.
But I think that, recognizing this time of the year, I'm going to be busier, and that's okay, but I need to make sure that everything else is in harmony with that. So for me, it's important for me to force myself at times to interact with people, and then also take that time out for myself and say, okay, this is the weekend. This is my time. I have to completely check out, and take myself. I'm big into skincare, and just, I love, massages, things like that are just kind of physical releases for stress. I tend to carry stress in my shoulders and in my neck. And if it starts getting built up, I'm like, okay, it's time to kind of take a step back. I'm recognizing that this is a physical sign. I need to go and do something for myself. But it's so hard when we're helping others to not feel selfish in those moments at times. And just recognizing also maybe this is not a good time for me to be presenting. Maybe this is not a good time for me to be doing this particular activity or program. There's nothing wrong with that, because it's not helpful to my audience or to those people that I'm trying to work with if I'm not in a healthy state to be doing these things. And so letting others know, like, I'm going to find someone else who can do this for you, and you're in great hands, but I just need to take a little time for myself because I don't feel like I'll be valuable to you right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, setting those boundaries can be hard. And I mean, in any nonprofit, I think there are issues with kind of scope creep, or, just the need has got to be so great that, yeah, you need to be able to lean on others and pass the workload on. If you're not able, there's no possible way for you to handle everything.
Right.
And what words of wisdom do you have for others who are working to make their own impact?
I think it's so important to find like-minded individuals that you can pull from when you need that strength. I think it's so important because you're going to have times where you run into an obstacle or a barrier, and someone else may have already encountered that same thing, and they can give you guidance. Or if they can't necessarily give you guidance, they may just be able to give you encouragement, and we all need that.
Mm-hmm.
So, find your people, and creating boundaries of people that may not be those people that can encourage or offer guidance. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't always connect with people, and we have, clashes when it comes to our perspectives, and there's nothing wrong with that, but knowing who your inner circle is so important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I love that. Yep. You got to have that inner circle, those key people that you can lean on, and that you're there for too. That can hold you up, right?
Right.
Yes. And that you can be real with.
Right.
I think sometimes when you're in that public eye in a certain way, you're not going to be as vulnerable with people that you don't know as well. So you're going to need those people that you can really, yeah. Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing it's a heartbreaking story. And again, I am so grateful that you you could have turned your back on that whole world, but instead you're standing tough there and working to help others so that, they can become aware, be educated, and, say that word suicide, and hopefully, notice the warning signs and be there to have the tough conversations to help someone avoid it.
Great, thank you.
Yes. And I encourage you, if you want to check out the Suicide Prevention Allies, the nonprofit, and donate if you want to donate to the cause. So again, it is Suicide Prevention Allies, and Susie's website will be on the show notes page for today. So go to defeatthedrama.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 155, and her website is susiereece.org. So SUSIEREECE.org. And again, that'll be on the notes page for today's episode. So thank you so much for joining me, and everyone who's listening, thank you. And I encourage you to find a way to become educated so that you can notice the warning signs and dive in if you feel like there's a problem. Be that person who can help someone else or at least point them in a direction of resources. So thank you, and everyone, get out there and make your great impact in the world. Until next time, make it a great day.